So I've been in a Kayneth mood as of late, and you have to wonder what exactly went wrong with Kayneth. Now, if we're going by the book, and I do mean that figuratively, you could say everything. Everything went wrong with Kayneth. But my thing is, I really want to dial in on that one event that was really the point of no return for him. The first thing that you would want to bring up is his arrogance. That's the easy thing to say, right? He's got 9 generations worth of magecraft backing him up. With his magic crest, he's got a lot of pull in the clock tower, he's well respected, all these different assets available to him, and for those same reasons, the war shouldn't have been nearly as difficult for him to maneuver as it was, especially from the very start. Kayneth was arrogant, but it wasn't a level of arrogance without conscious decision. Like, think about Diarmu's fight with Artoria, for example. While he still had other things to learn about the other masters, even though he had lost Iskander by that point, his servant Diarmu was putting one of the greatest fighters on the back pedal. And then all of the other servants start to show up. Gilgamesh, Iskander, Lancelot, and then the dynamic starts to change. Now, if Kayneth was truly as arrogant as people make him out to be, he could have easily just let Diarmu keep fighting and see how things turned out, just as the other masters were doing. But once he realized that the situation was more so out of control, he pulled out immediately, even having that favor of Diarmu getting his win. When he saw Gilgamesh and what he was capable of, he immediately wanted to recondition the situation. And you see these things happening to him over and over again throughout the story. You want to believe that he made his own bed, but at times for him, it seems like an onslaught of unfortunate events, like almost as if it's a curse. And when I got to thinking about it, remember how we addressed how servants are like their masters in nature? Diarmu was the same type of person. His blessing was a curse, and it followed him for the rest of his life. Something that I really haven't honed in on with Kayneth is that it's almost the same thing, where his blessing of having that magic crest was his curse, and it followed him throughout the entirety of the war. Had nothing to do with Kayneth. Kayneth didn't do anything wrong, but it just feels like it was the story itself trying to match up to his quality, where you got this guy Kiritsugu on the same level as you without having to advance and go by your scheme. You got this guy that says, I don't do rules and I could care less about them, but I'm still gonna hang with you and I'm gonna give you a lot of trouble. And that's something that wasn't really foreseeable for Kayneth. I feel like that's something that he should have been able to deal with, but Kiritsugu was always one step ahead. Also, it made their combat a bit of a rivalry, because Kayneth could have fought anybody, but in particular, he kept running into Kiritsugu. And I do mean that narrative wise. I don't mean they ran into each other by mishap. I mean, they're literally written to run into each other over and over again, instead of Kayneth going against somebody that he could actually take down. Like Akarya, for instance. Kayneth never ran into Akarya. You could say that, oh well, everybody was operating from the shadows. Yeah, that makes sense for Tokiomi. He didn't even leave the room. But Kayneth was ready. He was well prepared. He was in the field with his servant. It's not like he was twiddling his fingers. Truth be told, Kayneth could have ran into anybody, but the intent focus was to show that even the quote-unquote best can fall if they're in the right circumstances, and they really wanted to get that off with Kiritsugu's character. So as I first look at this, I don't think there was much that could have saved Kayneth unless you alter the entire story, because it definitely wasn't Iskander. Even if Kayneth just so happened to keep Iskander over Diarmu, a lot of positions Iskander would have been in the same place as Diarmu. And that's another thing. Iskander would have fought differently because he was under Kayneth. Because the whole thing about Waver is that Waver was inexperienced and he kind of tried to follow the mold of what Kayneth was without actually being him. That's why he took Iskander's catalyst in the first place. He wanted to be in that position earlier than he was supposed to. I think that is what would have made Kayneth really arrogant if he summoned Iskander like he was supposed to. But since part of his plans were already foiled, in that vein he was moving softly. Even if he did have Iskander, there still would have been the issue of dealing with Kiritsugu. And we already saw when Saber was on go against Iskander, there wasn't really much he could do. I would have loved to see her use Excalibur against his army and how that would have fared against her. Because again, remember, Excalibur has the seals. I feel like Jill's phantasm being a literal outer existence falls under the description to break enough of the seals where you would use them at a notable power. But against something like Iskander's army, you would kind of have to deal with the situation as is. And that's why Gil fighting against Iskander is so perfect, because Aya doesn't have seals. It's very possible that that fight would have went really bad for Saber, which would have been really good for Kayneth, and that's why he couldn't have him. We can't have the good guy getting the good things too. And while I do understand that that's the entire purpose for most of the people in Fate Zero, for him it becomes almost uncanny. Look at Sola. You can tell that Kayneth really cared about that girl. He respected her enough to have her involved the same way that Kiritsugu did with Irisville. And it goes way beyond just him wanting to extend his lineage, because that's the normal Magus concept. There's actually a bit of humanity there. And this is further expounded upon by the fact that she would go so far to betray him, and he's in utter shock. He can't believe it. Now, if he really was expecting her to do him this way, he wouldn't be nearly as petrified as he was when she put him under those circumstances. The only problem is the feelings weren't mutual. There's a bit where Kayneth talks about how a low-level mage could ward off Diarmu's curse if they chose to do so. So he found it really strange that it was working on Sola, who is more than certainly equipped to do so, yet it appears that she's fallen for Diarmu. But that's because she didn't fall for the curse. She wanted to be wooed by Diarmu, so much that she would go as far to betray Kayneth while he's already on his deathbed. This man's sitting here laying on his back, and you're literally healing him to torture him yet again, and then strip him of his command spells. But you're supposed to be on his side. You know, between these two people, Karya and Kayneth, it really goes to show you that you can't help who you want to be with, because his position, him being with Sola in general, was obviously something constructed by the clock tower. It was manufactured. The same way Karya tried to chase Aoi down, and no matter what he did, she said, "I could care less. I like Tokiomi. Kick rocks." And that's just what it is. Again, I think it's respectable that Kayneth didn't make his whole life revolve around it, but it is something to take a look at. The energy has to be there. That's why I find it kind of funny when people try to make Kiritsugu out to be like this monster just because of the role that he played in the story. Oh, he did all this, and look how he treats people, and look what he'd do when he's put against the wall. Again, just like Kirei, you can say that, you can frame it a certain way, but he's the most humane out of everybody. He's too humane. That's his biggest flaw. But at least Irisville loved him mutually. No strings attached. And that's something that neither Kayneth nor Karya had. And this is before you get to Ilya, when initially his whole purpose was to just fight for the Einsburns, and he turned it into this. So what I'm getting at here is that it also goes to show you how powerful love is, man. Because since Kiritsugu had those people in his corner, it seemed like the narrative worked more in his favor because he was betting on everything for them. And that's something that Kirei even brought up that he was jealous of, how he's incapable of feeling and he wish he had that. And here you have Kiritsugu wanting to throw it away because he's too humane. So if I had to say anything was his biggest flaw, it would have to be that. It would have to be not having someone genuine in his corner that was really there for him and not just politics. Because I feel like it might have taken him a long way. It would have gave him a lot more drive. It would have affected his decision making. I've said it before, you can be loved by thousands of people, but if you're not loved by the right person, it's all gonna feel hollow. I see it all the time. You're chasing after somebody else's approval, and that person that you're chasing after is chasing after somebody else's approval. Because you can change out all the other variables, it's still gonna have the same result. You can have Kayneth get his Skander, you can have Diarmu win the second fight against Saber, you can have him beat Kirisugu, but somewhere down the line, there's going to be a situation that he has to deal with where he meets his match. Even in the FGO event in Excel Order, it was necessary for him to get Waver's help in order for him to take down Jill. He had no way of taking down Jill otherwise. If Jill would have still got that off, he still would have lost, because Diarmu couldn't do anything, and as you seen with his Skander, all he could do was keep the monster at bay, and he was barely doing that. He would need an entirely new servant, someone probably on the level of Gilgamesh, for him to even stand a chance. If he kept a Skander and ended up having to go against Gilgamesh, we saw how that would have turned out. Now don't get me wrong, Kayneth is an infinitely better master than Waver, but even if Iskander was able to continue fighting even after he lost his entire reality marble, what is he gonna do against the Gate of Babylon? Like, that was his bread and butter. But Gil can just keep pulling things out, and it's only gonna get worse. And while Tokiomi wasn't the greatest mage, at the very least, he wasn't wasting magical energy because he's out here hiding. When he crept into the Ainsburn Castle and he had Hydrodrum, that wasn't a bad idea. He knew the position of Saber, he knew the position of Diarmu. It was the perfect time to sneak on Kirisugu. The only thing is that Kirisugu, he's highly skilled, highly trained, and he's got mystic codes himself. And most of all, he doesn't play by the rules. If I could throw in one more additional thing that might have made the difference, it would have been some different mystic codes that were possibly more flexible. But man, Hydrodrum is a really good mystic code. If I was him, I wouldn't think I need something else either. And why risk having everything where I could be put in a situation that would jeopardize those things even being in my possession, especially if I'm constantly gauging the situation. Maybe he should have brought the mystic codes just in case, because it is said that he had a number of mystic codes at his disposal, high level ones. Were they better than Hydrodrum? I doubt it. I don't think he's as nearly as arrogant as the story paints him out to be. I know it goes out of its way to make it like that. I don't believe so. And I know a lot of people will say, well, oh, he had everything handed down to him. That's cool, but I still respect him way more than a lot of other people in the war. At least he didn't forego obligation like Karya to chase down a woman that didn't even want him, or sit in the basement like a bitch like Tokiomi. I feel like for those two reasons alone, he's more respectable than both of them combined.